morning's scripture reading is going to come from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard of this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. Then he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law. He asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
You know how in life there are some things that you can look forward to and just absolutely dread all at the same time? Well, when I was a kid, that was Christmas for me. I mean, I really looked forward to Christmas, and like every other kid in the United States, Christmas was a very magical time. There was a lot to look forward to. There was the joy of just being out of school for 2 weeks. That in itself was worth the holiday all by itself. And then there was the fact that the Sears and Roebuck catalog came every year. And those of you my age are going, "Oh yeah." And those of you younger are going, "What's a catalog? I've never seen a catalog." I know the internet. I understand the internet. But the catalog would come as a big book with colorful pictures, and the whole back section was nothing but toys. Remember that? I'd spend hours perusing through it, looking at all of the toys. And Rudolph was on every year. I love Rudolph. And there were presents under the tree. Everything about Christmas was wonderful for me except for one thing. Every year about October, my piano teacher would haul out this moth-eaten, dust-covered piece of music of some Christmas song that hadn't been sung since the wise men actually walked across the planet. And she would put it in front of me, and she would blow the dust off of it, and she'd say, "This is your song that you have to play for the recital. You've got 2 months to learn it before you play in front of people." And I got to tell you something, folks. When I was a kid, I hated playing piano. Oh, how I hated playing piano. I hated everything about it. I hated practicing piano. I hated going to lessons. I hated carrying that book around with me, the John Thompson's Teaching Little Fingers to Play. Hated everything about it. But the one thing I hated more than playing piano was playing in front of people, because I stunk at it. I was awful. It was pitiful. I would play in these recitals, and all the adults would politely clap while the kids laughed, and they would say things like, "Bless his heart, he's trying really hard. He probably goes to a special school or something," And it was embarrassing, and I hated to play in the Christmas recital. It ruined Christmas for me every year. It just made me sick on my stomach. But I would try hard to get sick every Christmas. But I was never lucky enough to get pneumonia like all the other kids got, but I had to stay healthy at Christmas time. And sure enough, one Saturday every December, my mom would haul me into the house that afternoon and show me the clothes that I had to wear to the recital this year. And for some reason or another, my mom, I guess, really admired Little Lord Fauntleroy for some reason or another. And the outfit she would buy me every year for this recital would look like something that he threw up all over. And honest to Pete, if I'd worn a pink tutu, it would have been more masculine than the clothes I had to wear to this thing. And I'd go in and I'd sit down and I'd play, and all the younger kids who hadn't been playing as long, they would play these neat songs that were harder, and they'd play them better, and I would just stink up the place, and it was just awful. I hate it. To this day, I cannot hear the song, "It's a Marshmallow World in the Winter," without going into a panic attack. You laugh. I'm struggling here and still dealing with the pain. You know, it is funny how on one aspect of Christmas, I anticipated it with great joy. And the other aspect of Christmas, I anticipated it with terror and with nausea. And yet we use the same word to describe both processes, anticipate. And believe it or not, that's the word we want to look at this morning. That's the word that ends with ATE that we're talking about today. Remember, 2 weeks ago we talked about checkmate. And last week we talked about integrate. Today we're talking about anticipate. And in its simplest form, the word anticipate means to see something that's coming down the road in the future. It might be far off future, it might be near future. But to think about something that is coming and to react accordingly. And in reality, a large part of our Christmas celebration deals with the anticipation of Christmas. We spend about a month on average, some people longer, some people not quite as long, but on average, we spend about a month of our lives out of every single year doing nothing but anticipating the coming of Christmas, looking forward to it, thinking about it, and reacting accordingly. And some of the things about the anticipation of the Christmas celebration cause us to anticipate it with joy. Some of the things are a little bit tougher. But that's what anticipation actually does. Do you remember how we said that whenever we end that word or any word with the letters ATE, it changes the meaning of the word to show how it is supposed to change us? Well, it changes 1 month out of our life every year. But for those who anticipated the first Christmas, the very birthday of Jesus, the very day in which he was born, those who anticipated coming to worship the Christ child, it didn't just change a month out of their year, it changed their entire life. Like, for instance, in this particular picture here, that's the one, there you go. In this particular picture here, the 3 men that are worshiping and bowing down at the feet of the Christ child. That anticipation changed just a little bit more than just 30 days out of their life. You know, it would probably have offended these guys if they knew that we sang about them as kings. They weren't kings. They were magi, magicians. They were soothsayers. They were the kind of guys who were paid to interpret the dreams and the signs of the coming future for the king. These guys were a lot more interested in looking at the stars to tell the future and looking at the entrails of chickens to know what's coming up next. Now, we don't know exactly where they were from. The Bible just says that they were from the east. But, you know, knowing that they're from the east and that they were magi, they were these magicians, these soothsayers, chances are pretty good they were from Babylon. Because these kinds of guys were a very big part of their society at that point in time. So if they are from Babylon, you know what else is not unlikely? It's not unlikely that they may have even been Jewish themselves. Because Jewish soothsayers, Jewish magicians were highly sought after in that culture. They were highly respected, and they had been ever since the time of Daniel. And even if they weren't Jewish, they were probably influenced by the Jewish spiritualists in that particular area, to the point where they probably knew that a prophet so many years ago, a prophet by the name of Balaam, had prophesied that a star would come out of Jacob and that it would herald the birth of a king who would hold the scepter over all of Israel. And so that first night when they looked out at the stars that they had looked at so many times before, and for the very first time they saw that one extra star they had never seen. And it didn't just seem to be a star, it seemed to call out to them. And it seemed to even move. It seemed to be calling them to follow. And maybe God spoke to them through an angel as he had in the dream to Joseph. Or maybe they were reminded of the prophecy of the coming Jewish Messiah. Either way, they heard a call to follow the star to the king. Now, tradition tells us that there were 3 of these wise men / magi. Now, we don't know that for sure. In fact, some biblical scholars have suggested that there were actually 4 wise men, but the 4th one actually, as his gift, brought fruitcake, so he was dropped from the story pretty early. They didn't want to talk about him. But regardless, the Magi believed that their destiny was determined by the star that you're born under. Now, take that in mind. They think that everything in your life that is going to happen is predetermined by whatever star you happen to be born under. And this kid, who's going to be a king, is born under a star that had never appeared for anybody else in history. This kid who was born a king is born under a star that actually moves. So this kid who is born a king is going to be unlike any king that has ever been. And so they make their way across the wilderness following that star until they come to the city of Jerusalem. Now, there have been a lot of questions and conjecture as to why they went to Jerusalem first. I mean, after all, Jerusalem? But the easiest answer to that is it was on the way. Because you see, Bethlehem is southwest of Jerusalem. And if they came from the east, they basically had to pass through Jerusalem on their way. It's the way the star was headed, so that's where they went. And in addition to that, I mean, where else would you expect a Jewish king to be born than in the Jewish capital? So there they go. But this is what they don't know. Of all the places in that point in history that you could have gone to and started asking questions about a newborn king who's someday going to rule over all Israel, Jerusalem was probably the most dangerous city of all. Because the Bible says that it was in the days of King Herod. And more specifically, you know who they're talking about? They're talking about a guy named Herod the Great. And of all the rulers in history who have ever been paranoid and bloodthirsty, King Herod the Great had to be one of the worst. He was so afraid that someone was going to murder him and take away his crown and his rule that he even killed his own sons before they could get old enough to even think about trying to usurp his authority. But not just his sons, he killed his wife. He killed his own mother for fear that she might have other sons, that he might have brothers who then could lay claim to his throne. He was constantly killing this person or that person or that person over there for fear that they might be starting a rebellion against him. And the streets of Jerusalem ran red with the blood that Herod was pouring out. And that's why when the scriptures say that Herod was disturbed when he got the word about the new king born, it says that Jerusalem, all of Jerusalem was disturbed with him because they hear all this talk about a new king and the only thought that they can think is somebody's going to get killed. Because any life that wasn't Herod's was cheap in his eyes. And when he gets the word, he is disturbed and he realizes something. Just killing the Magi at this point, it's too late for that. They've already stirred up the crowds. They've already got people talking. And if they just disappear, then the crowds will begin to wonder, hey, maybe there's something to this. He's not just got to kill the Magi. He's got to get rid of the kid too. And so he calls in his religious advisors and he asks them, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And they quote Micah, the Old Testament prophet, Micah 5:2 to be exact, where it says that this would happen in the city of Bethlehem. So now he's got a place. So he calls the Magi in for a conference, a secret conference. He doesn't want the word to get around that he's talking to these guys for fear that the crowds, the people out there, might know what he's up to, and they might try to rebel against him, or they might try to hide the child from him. So they are called in secretly, and he tells them, he lies to them, and he says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to Bethlehem, and when you get a street address where this child is, you come right back here, and you tell me, because you know what I want to do? I want to go, and I want to worship him too. And so, not knowing enough about Herod to understand who he is and what he's actually doing, with their truest of intentions, they set off for Bethlehem. It's 5 miles southwest. And when they get out of the city of Jerusalem, they look up and they start to see the star, and it's moving again. And they start to follow the star, and it leads them right to Bethlehem, just like it was said before. They traveled over hills where the shepherds keep watch over their flocks at night. They traveled over hills where so many generations earlier, King David himself, the ancestor of the Messiah, he had wandered those hills, watching his sheep. They make their way into the city. The star comes over the place where the young child is, and they walk in, and they find Jesus and his mother there, and they give him the gifts that they brought, and they worship him. And then somehow or another, they do the oddest thing. They find some place to lay down and fall asleep. And during that time that they're asleep, God comes to them again. And once again, in a dream perhaps, for the second time, they hear his voice saying, "This is what I want you to do. You don't go back the way you came. You're going to take the long way home. You're going to avoid Jerusalem at all costs because you can't trust Herod. So for the safety of the child and your own lives, you are to go back another way." And once again, they obey. They do what God tells them to do, and they disappear from the story of the Messiah forever. But you know, I've often wondered if maybe, just maybe, those magi were disappointed in the way it all turned out. I mean, you have to think that they made this long journey and they were expecting some sort of a pomp and celebration at the birth of the king, but nobody even seemed to notice or care. They would have expected his people to welcome him. They, who are not even anticipating being his subjects, they're from Babylon, not Israel. They traveled all this way to find him, and they find him with no attendance whatsoever except his own mother. They would have expected him to sit on a throne, not hang on a cross. They had anticipated a king, and it changed them, but it didn't seem to have that much impact on the world. And I think it's because the world really wasn't anticipating God to come himself, for God to be in the flesh. And so the world went by largely unnoticing and largely unchanged because the world wasn't anticipating. And when you anticipate something, it changes you. For instance, when you truly anticipate God to do something wonderful, it makes you willing to make a sacrifice yourself. As we said before, these guys are probably from Babylon in that Persian area. And they may have been as much as 1,000 miles away from home by the time they finally got to Bethlehem. It has been estimated that these guys spent at least 4 months, if not 2 years, traveling and preparing for this journey to make their way to see Jesus. That's a long time to be away from home. They had to prepare for the trip. And it began with taking large amounts of money and stocking up food to take. It's not like they were saying, "Okay, I tell you what, guys, let's meet here tomorrow morning, about dawn, and we'll head out. We'll take my camel because it gets the best gas mileage, and we'll stop at the first Cracker Barrel we come to, and we'll grab some breakfast, and then we'll make our way on the rest of the way, and we'll be home by tomorrow evening." You know, that's not the way this went. They had to travel mostly by foot. If they did have some beasts of burden, they were burdened with food and with gifts and things like that. And they walked 1,000 miles across very inhospitable territory, most of which was common to thieves. Now, these guys are obviously wealthy. They dress well. That makes them a perfect target for thieves. And yet they were willing to make this journey. They went all that distance, all to see a king that none of them even were likely to have thought that they would ever be a part of his kingdom. But God had told them a wondrous secret. A king was born, and they anticipate something wonderful. And there's no sacrifice too great because you sacrifice of yourself. That's normal when you anticipate receiving something wonderful from God. When Sarah and I were in our younger years, just a few years after we were married, we were somewhat poverty-stricken, I think is the nice way to put it. We were poor. Flat, busted, solid, broke. And we were just barely able to get by on my salary and hers and pay our rent down in Tennessee, where the rent was a lot higher than anywhere else in the world, basically, it seemed like. And we were just getting by. And if we wanted to do anything special, we had to kind of save up money for it. And because we couldn't save up much money, we had to kind of look forward to those times when we got that little bit extra money. So every now and then, one of us would have a birthday, or it'd be Christmas, and somebody slip us $20. That was kind of nice. Or I'd do a wedding or something like that, and we'd have a little extra money. So if you wanted to buy anything special, you wanted to do anything special, you had to wait until you had that extra money come in. And it was my birthday. I'll never forget this. It was a birthday of 1990, 25 years ago. And I knew what I was going to use my extra money for, because I'd been thinking about it all year long. I wanted a new pack to carry when I go hiking, a new tent to sleep in, because the old one just really wasn't working for me, and I needed something that would be a little bit more watertight. And I had it picked out, and I knew who was giving me what and what the money would be used for, and I had it all set aside. And I thought, man, just the day after my birthday. Birthday fell on a Sunday, and the day after my birthday, I was going to take Monday morning off. I was going to go shopping. Now, let me tell you something. I hate to shop. But when you're buying backpacking stuff, shopping becomes a joy. And I was looking forward to it. So my birthday came, sure enough. I opened all the cards. I had enough money, and it was going to be a great day. And after everybody left that afternoon, Sarah said, I got one more present for you. And I said, what is it? She said, here. And I opened it up, and inside there were 2 books. One was entitled 1,001 Baby Names, and the other one was called What to Expect When You're Expecting. And I thought, oh, what the heck is this? And I realized it came over me. We're going to have a baby. And this was the greatest news in the world. We were going to have a baby. And all I could think of is, this is the most wonderful thing we're anticipating. In 9 months, we're going to go from 2 people to 3 people. And I don't know how I'm going to feed that kid, but we'll figure out a way to do it somehow or another. And this is the greatest news, greatest birthday present I ever got. And so the next morning, when it came time to go shopping, the first place I went was to every Hallmark store in town. Now, my birthday falls at the end of May, which means Mother's Day was 3 weeks earlier. But I went to every Hallmark store until I found one that still had a Mother's Day card stuck back in the back section of some drawer somewhere, and I bought my wife a Mother's Day card. And then I thought, you know what? Let's look over here. This is cute. And I started just buying stuff like crazy. And I ended up buying this 3-foot-tall stuffed Mickey Mouse for my new son. Oh, how I wish I'd bought him anything else in the world. Bugs Bunny, My Little Pony, I don't care. Anything but Mickey Mouse. But I bought him this stuffed Mickey Mouse, and I brought it home and pretty much wiped myself out of all my funds. And to this day, you know what? I got another pack sometime later. I got another tent sometime later. They've both worn out, and they're gone. Still got that mouse. Been 25 years since our son Josh was born. He'll turn 25 in 3 weeks. And I still consider it to be the best money I ever spent in my entire life. And you know what? It really didn't feel like very much of a sacrifice. Because you're willing to give of yourself when God has promised you something wonderful that you can anticipate. Another thing that changes when you're anticipating something wonderful from God, you bow down and you worship Him. I love the fact that these men who probably had very little understanding of what all of this meant, as soon as they saw the Christ child, they fall immediately on their knees in the presence of the King. And it's interesting that the religious people who should have been there just weren't. Those scribes, they knew that Jesus had been born. They knew that the Messiah was in Bethlehem, but they didn't go with the Magi. King Herod said he wanted to worship, but he really didn't worship. He didn't want to. And it's funny, a lot of people claim that they want to worship, but not everybody does. Let me tell you something. If you're anticipating a king from heaven itself, the very Son of God, that should bring your heart to its knees when you meet Him. And third, you obey when you anticipate a king from God. God called these men to go, and they went. God called these men to follow a moving star, and they did so. And when they had seen the child and it was time to return home, He told them to go home by another route, and they obeyed there too. He told these men to rebel against the orders of a king who enjoyed putting people to death publicly, knowing full well that if they get caught going home by another way instead of coming and speaking to the king as they had been ordered to do, their lives would have been forfeited on the spot. And yet they obeyed in every turn because God told them to. There's nothing unnatural about following God's will and obedience when He's led you to something wonderful. So they saw the Christ child. They saw the king that they had come to meet. I doubt it was exactly what they anticipated, but they gave up their whole lives. And they obeyed God so that they could worship the king. And you know, some ways, we can't do what they did because we're not anticipating Christ's birth. That's already happened. But we are anticipating the celebration of Christ's birth in just a week and a half. Can I ask you, what has that anticipation of the celebration of Jesus' birth changed in you? Are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up of your own life as you look forward to the celebration of Jesus? I know right now time is at a premium, but are you willing to give up some of yours to help someone who is in need? Because you remember that Jesus said, if you do it for the least of these, you're actually doing it for me. Every year at the Christmas Eve service, we offer the opportunity to give to someone else who might be dealing with some difficulty that you might not even be aware of. We call it the Christ Birthday Offering. Now, you'll never know the names of the people who receive that, but they will know that you love them because you love Jesus. And that's not much of a sacrifice to make. What about the obeying part? Is there a part of your life that you're holding back from God? Christmas would be a wonderful time to let go of that and be obedient to Him. Do you try to find excuses not to follow His word when it says that we shouldn't forsake the assembling of ourselves together as a church? Are there parts of your sexuality that are not in line with His design for your life? Do you find yourself spending a lot of time cleaning the history off of your computer so that no one will know? Have you been holding off on being baptized into Him even though you know it's His will and His command? What about worship? In your heart, do you fall on your knees before God or just go through the motions? Do you really anticipate a king? Because there's one other aspect of all this that we need to deal with. We need to remember that these guys came because they anticipated the coming of a king, but that time has passed. He came, but you know what we anticipate? We anticipate the fact that He says He's coming back. We anticipate the return of that same king. What have you done in your life in anticipation of His return? Have you given up your life to Him so that you can receive a life that's never going to end? Are you obedient? Have you accepted His offer to take away the sin that is keeping you from Him? And you know something about that worship thing? There's a scripture that says that a day is going to come when every knee will bow before that King. Why not do that now in anticipation rather than later in regret? Today, if you've never accepted the gift, if you've never bowed your knee to the King, this is your opportunity as we sing our song of invitation. If you've never allowed Jesus to forgive you of your sins, this is your chance. If you have any other decision that you need to make today, don't put it off even one more moment. Let's stand together and sing our song of invitation. If you have a decision to make, please come out into the aisle. Walk forward as we sing.
a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Thank you, Phil, for another wonderful message. You know, this time of year is a busy time of the year. No different for churches either. You know, for example, here we're going to have our family Christmas movie. A fellow told me to push the free popcorn. It's free popcorn, okay? No, actually, we're having a joint Kyle Idleman movie tonight, The Christmas Experience. So if you could make it out to that. Also, remember Wednesday, December 16th at 11:30 a.m., ladies' lunch at Pizza Hut. All ladies are welcome to attend at 6 p.m. Christmas caroling that night. Refreshers followed in the Life Center. I'll be here about 5:45 to load the van, and we're going to leave at 6. At 6 p.m., the kids' choir rehearsal this Wednesday. Sunday, December 20th, the musical Christmas in Kid City will be done. That's dress rehearsal, correct, Jamie? Oh, it says dress rehearsal here. 4 to 6, okay. Gotcha. Thursday, December 24th is our candlelight Christmas Eve service. If you've never been to one of those, and it's a very, very wonderful service that we have here at Woodlawn, Christmas Eve service. Bring a friend with you, bring some family with you, and come out and enjoy the Christmas Eve service on the 24th. We've got some prayer requests here I'd like to read to you. One is for the Christians across the world that's under persecution. We want to keep them in our prayers. We have one for Ruby Clark, who is in the hospital. Prayer for her family to have wisdom in making some decisions. Jason will be having some tests this week. Keep him in your prayers. Sue Posey has some heart issues. We want to keep her in prayers. And also, Thomas Ford's son is in Cosair with pneumonia and other complications. We want to keep them in our prayers. Remember those on our prayer list as we go to our prayer time. So Michelle will be having a baby sometime in the next 6 months, so we want to keep her in our prayers. And it's a girl. All right. So let's, at this time, let's go to the Lord in prayer. I'm sorry, we got one back. Okay. Thomas Ford. Thought you'd give me a card. What'd I do with it? Aaron and Annette Phillips and their 4 kids. No, they'll be coming in. I'm moving from Hawaii to Virginia, right? That's exciting. We'll keep them in their prayers too, okay? Is any others? Let's just open. Anybody else? Co-worker having gastric bypass? Spanking? Okay. Janie, my daughter, will be having surgery tomorrow. Health issues there. Shayla Vaughn's mother. Guys, pray for, as Billy had mentioned earlier, for the leadership in the coming years. And pray for those that have served for a long time. We do appreciate you guys, all of you. You know, all of you guys that's been here. Joe Rakes Jr. has cancer and treatments coming up. Oh, we will miss you. Anybody else? Okay. Steve Phillips, would you?